You've probably heard of the female gaze. Picture this. You're at a party and you're sweaty and you have a headache and you overhear some guy wearing a vintage sweater vest, of course, describing what the female gaze is to a girl he would preferably like to make out with later. As he talks about what women are really attracted to, the girl is shifting her weight back and forth between her feet, clad in platform Doc Martens that she wished she hadn't worn because they're giving her blisters, and they make her a bit taller than this guy, which seems to be one of the reasons that he slinked over to her in the first place. Then I, dressed in a three-piece suit, sporting a top hat and fervently puffing on a cigar, firmly tap you on the shoulder and turn you around and say, "It's all a dream. You can wake up now." And suddenly you're sitting in a creaky wooden chair in an empty room, and I emerge from the shadows and say, "Welcome to my first and final film lecture." I'd venture to say the female gaze is one of the most popular and misunderstood film theories to date, and that's understandable, because how could something that's supposedly a nuanced critique of the male gaze also feel so one-note, so abstract and yet so defined? I feel like it's become this weird way of living against the patriarchy kind of declaration, which I guess is on the right track with the whole calling out and rejecting the objectifying masculine gaze, and yet it seems really shallow. What do you mean if I wear jorts and a t-shirt and glasses because I can't see, men won't objectify me? This whole thing is just perpetuating the, well, what were they wearing idea, while in actuality we know men are gonna do whatever they want regardless of what someone is wearing. This concept of the female gaze feels pretty well studied, and yet we're still here with these internet trends and articles listing the top 10 female gaze movies. Needless to say, I have questions, and I hope you'll stick around while I discover some answers. Obviously, I'm going to go over the background and attempt to deconstruct what the female gaze is, but I also would like to know who can have the female gaze. Does the female gaze have to be intentional? Can the female gaze be found in work otherwise dominated by a masculine gaze? And how does the female gaze see the body? Also, huge credit to Verily Bitchy's video about the lesbian gaze and Maya C's video about the female gaze. Theories about the gaze have been around for a long time. Basically, someone actively looks at someone else, making them an object within the fantasy of their own consciousness, which feeds and reassures their ego or their self. There's kind of dominance exhibited by the gazer here, an unequal relationship between the subject doing the looking, the fantasizing, and the object who is none the wiser. What's more, if the object of that gaze realizes they're being gazed at, they're made aware of their own existence, losing control of their inner consciousness, which is now dictated through the perspective of the gazer. For Laura Mulvey in her 1975 essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, the dominant position of men within the social order, their very control of language which enables their own way of thinking and moving about the world, allows them to stay in the position of the active gazers who derive meaning or an understanding of their own self by fixating on a woman's absence of a phallus. Basically, men derive power when they invent and fantasize over a woman's lack of it. This whole psychoanalytic phallocentrism thing is pretty archaic, and if anything seems to reinforce this notion that language is controlled by a heterosexual male point of view fixated on castration. So let's just say the male gaze, which is the gaze of the cisgender heterosexual white man, others women, as well as any individual who happens to be different from an invented yet dominant male ideal. And this gaze, which Mulvey applies to film, others women by treating them as passive objects to be displayed and looked at. The language within patriarchal society bleeds into and affects the cinematic codes, manipulating the visual and narrative aspects of film. Women's bodies are objectified into pieces in order to investigate or demystify their otherness as it relates to male pleasure. This dismisses a woman's whole person, as well as their interior, their feelings, their aspirations, and their desire as it relates to their own body. Joey Soloway builds on this, speaking about how this fragmentation extends to characterizations invented by men to divide women against each other for the satisfaction of male storytelling, and more so, male lives.
Men divide us for their storylines. They divide us so they can tell stories about us to other men.
The Madonna, the femme fatale, the whore, the damsel, the tomboy, the pick-me, the manic dream pixie girl, etc. all label women into broad categories which, once again, diminish their individualized feelings and experiences and simultaneously institute a fantastical ideal for women to strive for and an inferior category to avoid. The movie also mentions fetishization, which turns this otherness, this unfamiliarity that always threatens the male understanding of self into something reassuring. This can be visually or narratively. In my last video, I mentioned Tarantino's feet thing and Hitchcock's whole deal with blonde-haired, icy women, as well as Woody Allen having young women in his narratives be in love with older philosophical men. The movie also mentions styles of dress or particular objects, which are assigned to the exterior of a woman's body, think leather or ropes, as well as the fixation on beautification, which could involve heavy makeup or stereotypically feminine styles of dress to create the perfect product. It's the removal of the glasses, the learning to walk in high heels, the transformative makeover scene. Basically, something unrelated to sex is made sexual in order to reenact the pleasure derived from sex without being confronted by the content or real process of it, which might lead to a man's realization of their own otherness as it relates to a real woman's body. Additionally, in these fetishized and invented images, women are posed, never pictured conventionally or naturally. To elaborate, John Berger, in his exploration of the gaze as it relates to pieces of art, remarks,
"To be naked is to be oneself. To be nude is to be seen naked by others and yet not recognized for oneself. But always in the European tradition, the nude implies an awareness of being seen by the spectator. They are not naked as they are. They are naked as you see them."
If a whole woman's body is pictured by the male gaze in a film or in a painting like this, she's nude, she's stylized in an unnatural way, which undermines her own pleasure but satisfies that of the male's invented understanding of it. Ultimately, Mulvey posits that women are the object of voyeuristic, sadistic, and scopophilic or sexually objectified gazing, and they have the sadistic wills of men enacted upon them. She adds that this gaze is executed by three aspects: the camera, or the person behind the camera, aka the director, the audience as they watch the film, and the characters within the film. But it should be made clear, if it wasn't already evident, this whole thing really only works because it assumes the audience watching the film are the said heterosexual males we've been talking so much about. Of course, this becomes problematic when it's just supposed that a woman or anyone other than a man also adopts this type of gaze. Likewise, if a director wants to use the male gaze to make a comment about the male gaze to create a meta-narrative, it also only works if the audience is the heterosexual male or takes on that point of view. So at the end of the day, it's still a story about a woman created and directed by a man for other men. Essentially, as a woman watching a film, you become aware of the camera, of this gaze, creating an absence, a disconnect from the film text, from the narrative. The film fantasy is destroyed by the consciousness of yourself as this exterior object. Before I move on, I think there is something to be said about recognizing this gaze within a film, adopting the objectified character into your mind, and identifying with their alienation. Not in a way that says, I should be acting this way too, but in a way which says, I get you. I understand the position you're in because I'm there too. Reclaiming the gaze, or the narrative, which was cast upon them, looking at it critically while also identifying codes or subtext for yourself, which reflect your own oppression, discovering a richer characterization past the surface of the intended gaze. A classic example of this would be Marilyn Monroe, who was objectified by the male gaze on and off screen. This exploitation still obviously persists in different ways, for example, the Blonde movie from 2022, but nonetheless, many people have taken inspiration from Monroe's consciousness and even manipulation of the male gaze to her own advantage. Apart from her portrayal as this tragic figure, which, yes, she was, she also worked to subvert and resist the box she was confined to within Hollywood, exposing the unfairness of the system as well as the predatory practices and figures residing within it. She was aware of the power she had over men, aware of the camera filming her, but she also dared to return that gaze. And it's through this idea of returning the gaze we can start to explore what the female gaze is. Before we discuss the female gaze, I want to clear a few things up. The first thing, which I've kind of already touched on a little bit, when I use the term female gaze, it's primarily because it's the widely acknowledged set of words used to challenge the male gaze, but it's also a term which feels like a rigidly defined box of do's and don'ts, which are strictly only applicable to white, cisgender, straight women. I think a better name for it would be a reclaimed gaze, or alternatively a non-gaze, the latter altogether rejecting the notion of any kind of power imbalance which gazing implies. Basically, it's from the perspective of anyone who's been othered by the male gaze. So women, queer people, people of color. But for the sake of clarity and conformity, which I just love to do, I'll continue to use the term female gaze. With that idea, anyone, even men, can have a female gaze. This one is used a lot, rightly so, but take Pride and Prejudice directed by Joe Wright, for example. Likewise, anyone, which could be someone who's been othered by the male gaze, can also exhibit a male gaze, which, albeit is more often than not, done intentionally or with the subversion in mind. 2. The female gaze is not the opposite of the male gaze, so it doesn't objectify men for women's pleasure, which is an idea that also kind of assumes that female pleasure isn't also derived from other women or gender non-conforming people. Also, there's this impression that all women who are attracted to men are also attracted to them for their sweaty six-packs and generally big, beefy musculature, when it seems like what women really want to see are characters like Loki or Mr. Darcy. In the case of any objectification, there's still an unbalanced system of power at play, which tends to be rooted in patriarchy whether we realize it or not. And as mentioned previously, it seems like the female gaze is focused on getting rid of any imbalance. I say this carefully and with the added element that men are not oppressed in the same way that women are. That does not excuse objectification, of course, but when the whole historical and ongoing systematic weight of women being oppressed by men is brought into the conversation, I just don't feel like it's as simple as a double standard anymore. With that, the female gaze is not equivalent to a gender swap, or putting women in positions of power which have been traditionally likened to men. And this is because they can still be objectified. A common example is Lara Croft, but also look at like every woman superhero ever. 3. The female gaze is not a feminine aesthetic. The word aesthetic in and of itself already implies that something is curated or staged, but besides that, what I mean is that it's not flowers, it's not frilly things or makeup styles or pastel soft tones or basically anything that serves to reinforce what's already stereotypically feminine. Of course, I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with those aesthetics, but they're not exactly what the female gaze is about. So finally, what exactly is the female gaze about? I really like one of Joey Soloway's descriptions of the female gaze as a way of feeling seeing. The camera, the representation of sight and film, aims to understand the internal feelings, the desires of the characters it's filming by experiencing rather than just looking. It doesn't simply instruct us how to feel about someone by way of rigid visual codes signifying sadness or happiness, pain or pleasure. It shows the tears brimming on someone's eyelids or a nose nuzzling into someone's neck as they hold them tight. Abstract sensations or sounds which you could never describe, but you know because you felt them too. We're called by the camera to experience feelings alongside the characters it's showing so that we may build an understanding of their consciousness as well as our own. Thus, the camera becomes subjective, personal to not just the figures it portrays, but dedicated to the viewer's inner feelings as well. There's also this term which Soloway uses, the gazed gaze, which is from the perspective of the person being objectified by someone else's gaze, basically encapsulating what it feels like to be gazed at and to know that you're being gazed at. You can imagine that this is commonly done through POV shots, wherein we take on the sight of the character in a film. In this position, we may start to understand a loss of control, the alienation that one feels from themselves as they're judged as an exterior thing. But this could also encapsulate how the gazed person moves through the world and thinks of themselves in terms of how other people see them. Maybe they walk with confidence or at ease, obsessed with their body as something desired by others, or maybe the world spins around them. They grow increasingly ashamed of their wrinkles and blemishes which are out of their control. Although there's no one shown actually looking at them, maybe they imagine an invisible audience which dictates how they act. There's also this integral idea I mentioned earlier, returning the gaze, a fourth wall break, making the gazer aware of your awareness of their gaze, and also confronting them, demanding justice, exacting equality, or insisting that the looking be mutual.
Go ahead and stare. I'm not ashamed. Go on, laugh, get your money's worth. Nobody's going to hurt you. I know you want me to tear my clothes off so as you can look your 50 cents worth. 50 cents for the privilege of staring at a girl the way your wives won't let you.
With all of this being said, and as important as all of it is, I find it kind of limiting to say that the female gaze is this or that, which I don't think is the intention of the scholarship backing what I've been saying, of course, but unfortunately it comes off that way sometimes. Often when someone labels something as being the female gaze, the power of that something is reduced or limited by formalities, rights and wrongs. So I also want to make it clear that, in my opinion, this gaze that I've been speaking about doesn't have to be necessarily identifiable or explainable. And of course, it doesn't have to be all about how people suffer or are affected by the male gaze, which is nevertheless still important. It could be spinning and leaping through the street. It could be having a food fight. It could be two friends dancing to music from a makeshift radio, or having a race against two guys you're in love with. It could be dancing to fight the power, or it could be a girl taking a lighter out of another girl's pocket. It's taking the male gaze and laughing at it, running around it, dancing on it, throwing cake at its face, because it's ultimately a ridiculous thing. Now, real quick, let's revisit the questions I asked at the beginning of the video. Who can have the female gaze? Anyone. Anyone who feels othered by the dominant order and has something to say about it. And yes, that can mean straight white men. But more often than not, the people who are harnessing this gaze, who have stories to tell about it, are women, people of color, queer people, disabled folks, people who have been and continue to be oppressed by heteronormativity. Does the female gaze have to be intentional? Well, it most certainly can be. Actively thinking about how to go about filming or writing something that a viewer can experience or feel, and how you have to work with your actors or your cinematographer to get to that place. Also, thinking about how we could be purposely centering narratives which don't only include the feelings of straight white women. But like I mentioned, and like I will continue to say, putting a label on a way of seeing, chalking it down to specific techniques or styles of filming, sounds a lot like what the male gaze does. Instead of using existing codes, we should strive to create something new. And if something speaks to your experience, that's what really matters. In a way, no one should completely understand the female gaze or be able to sum it up into something easily digestible or consumable. How does the female gaze see the body? It sees the body in its natural element, not posed, just existing. The movements, the actions act as extensions of how it feels to live in that body. Rather than simply just showing someone's butt in skin-tight leather or their sweaty six-pack, there might be an emphasis on caressing hands, wandering eyes, things which engage the senses of the viewer. Maybe nothing completely identifiable is shown at all. The body, an endless landscape of skin that wrinkles and scars and morphs as muscles tense and relax. Can the female gaze be found in work which is dominated by a masculine gaze? Well, yes. Hello to Greta Garbo in any movie ever. I'll preface that by saying, in this day and age, we absolutely should not have to be sitting through movies that are controlled by a male gaze. There's no excuse for James Bond, Megan Fox, and Transformers 2016 Suicide Squad type movies anymore. Of course, that masculine gaze still sneaks its way into things. It's essentially always there if you think about it. But I like to think that we've come a long way. Even so, when I watch older movies, I'm talking like early to mid 1900s movies, which are so obviously almost laughably catered to a male point of view, I'm caught off guard by moments like this. Okay, this frame is from Alfred Hitchcock's 1927 silent movie The Lodger, starring Ivor Novello and June Tripp as the main love interests. Weirdly enough, I think this scene is meant to be pretty creepy because it's from the point of view of a man who's assumed by the audience up until this point to be the guy responsible for sneaking around in the night and killing women with blonde hair. Even so, this moment still manages to feel incredibly intimate, seeming to ease between frustration or pain and giving into pleasure. The Lodger, played by Novello in this moment, takes on a vulnerability that the masculine gaze would usually reject or hide. The sensuality, the yearning of it all. There's pain here, but also gentleness. There's a myriad of emotions I feel all while just watching these people seemingly melt into each other. Or this moment here, from the 1940 adaptation of Rebecca. Also another Hitchcock movie, mind you. Considering all of the problems I have with Hitchcock, he's kind of the king of homoerotic subtext. Like, I know Mrs. Danvers is supposed to be creepy, but there's something else obviously going on here for those that know. Almost like there's some kind of secret message, some kind of queer coding? Well, that's all for my questions. I hope they were at least somewhat interesting, and I hope they contributed something to this discussion at least. Obviously, I still have a lot to learn about this gaze, and if you would like to enlighten me in the comments, I would love to be enlightened. I'm going to close this out by reiterating, don't get too caught up in the labeling, in specifics, in do's or don'ts with this gaze. It's okay to not understand sometimes, to find comfort in abstraction.